Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff and Joe, the scientist, explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn and...
I'm Joe.
In our last episode, we covered kids' memories of past lives. We discovered that there's actual research, real scientific university-sponsored research into recording and researching this phenomenon. Also, in the middle of our last episode, if you'll recall, Joe, we heard 3 loud knocks.
Oh yeah, the knocks. That was interesting.
That was very interesting. So at the end of that...
Could you hear that?
I haven't played that one yet.
Oh, okay.
At the end of our recording session, Joe mentioned that we hadn't even gotten into all the other aspects of reincarnation from a physics point of view. And so I looked into some more things deeper. So in this episode, we'll go deeper and we'll see where Joe leads us. But I think I have some things in mind. And I do have a request, Joe.
Uh-huh.
Please keep it simple for my mind, please.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to backtrack and give a little background. First off, I'd like to remind you all of what reincarnation means. Okay, I'm reading this from Wikipedia.
Uh-huh.
Reincarnation, also known as rebirth, transmigration, or metempsychosis, is the philosophical or religious concept that the non-physical essence of a living being begins a new life in a different physical form or body after biological death. Resurrection is a similar process hypothesized by some religions in which a soul comes back to life in the same body. Resurrection is not the same as reincarnation, and I think it's important to stress that because I think there are people who confuse those two things.
Really interesting, real quick, really interesting thing about resurrection. Okay, so notice you have continuity of consciousness.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not like there's flickering.
You mean in resurrection you have continuity of consciousness?
Well, I mean like at every instance in time, you aren't like flickering to someone else's consciousness.
Oh, right. Okay.
You're viewing from one perspective.
Thank God.
Presumably, there's nothing particularly limiting you from a metaphysical standpoint and from a physics standpoint. Physics actually has a little quirk that allows this, where your continuity of consciousness could potentially jump when you stop being conscious, when you die, an indeterminate number of years in the future, when a similar structure can then host your consciousness again.
Oh, good Lord.
So, like, think of it like this. You go to sleep and you lose consciousness, right?
Uh-huh.
And presumably there's not some, like, subconscious version of yourself that is maintaining the continuity. And then when you wake up, there's a jump, but it's like, you were asleep and maybe you lost memories of that, but it's not like you're teleporting around or any weird stuff. So you're attached to your brain, which is a physical construct that hosts your consciousness. Something about it is keeping the continuity of your consciousness, right? So if that structure is gone for whatever reason, or there's consciousness and that are divorced from each other, they detach from each other for whatever reason. If there's a similar structure very far in the future that could host your consciousness, then you would presumably jump from that from point you die to that point. So it would look like
possession.
So it would look like you lose consciousness and then you just appear in a different circumstance very far in the future. And this is really weird.
It would look like to you.
Yeah.
But to the people around that other body, it would look like possession.
Consciousness is not required for a thing to continue functioning exactly like it was functioning. There's a such thing as called a philosophic zombie. Philosophic zombie looks and acts and as far as you can tell exactly is like a person, but it lacks consciousness. And I'm not talking like neurological consciousness. I'm talking like, imagine it doesn't have a soul. There's no way to know. It acts and looks exactly like a person, exactly like the situation where it does have a soul.
Well, you've given me a new reason to have nightmares.
Okay, yeah. But the really interesting variant of that consciousness jump thing is there's nothing like the universe where you're frequently making jumps like that to almost equivalent versions of the present state in the very far future is exactly the same as from your perspective, as the one where you're not making jumps. like in more physics parlance, your consciousness continuity is invariant to huge jumps through time. So like if, for instance, for whatever reason, the exact same circumstance appeared very, very far in the future, you could not tell from your perspective right now that you hadn't made a jump into the very far.
It would be like going to sleep and waking up.
Yeah, exactly. Every time you fall asleep, you could actually be waking up 10 to the 10 to the 10 to the whatever.
I do not like that.
Years in the future.
Do not like that.
But,
okay, so can I get back to
Okay, yeah, you go ahead.
Because actually there's a place where you can expand on that very perfectly.
Okay.
Okay, back to resurrection is not the same as reincarnation.
Uh-huh.
In most beliefs involving reincarnation, the soul is seen as immortal, and the only thing that becomes perishable is the body. Upon death, the soul is transmigrated into a new infant, or in some cases an animal, to live again. The term transmigration means passing of soul from one body to another after death. Reincarnation literally means to take on the flesh again. So I'm going to interject because what you were talking about.
Uh-huh.
So let me just find it in here because I thought that was really pretty, kind of reminded me of the same thing. James Matlock believed, and I think he was a scientist or a parapsychologist. He believes that reincarnation could be more like possession. The reincarnated mind takes over the baby's body, or what you're talking about, an adult body, or who knows what body, another body. But it's not necessarily a total replacement of the baby's own mind. Matlock believes that memories stored in the subconscious emerge to our conscious awareness after rebirth as a past life memory. Replacement reincarnation is possible before or after birth and suggests that a person's mind can be swapped for the mind adhering to the deceased person, which kind of goes along with that. And it all comes down to something these parapsychologists are calling the psychophore.
Psychophore, that's cool.
Yeah.
Sounding.
So psychophore literally means, this term psychophore means soul bearer, or the canvas where memories are collected.
I just really have to ask, so from a purely physicalist perspective, a conventional physicalist perspective, so there's subatomic particles, there's quantum fields, whatever. We pretty much know what the universe looks like from a conventional perspective. If you're talking about a soul, that has no place in that perspective. Like I'm talking about like some other kind of thing that's attaching to your body, like an astral body, whatever. That doesn't have a place in that perspective, really. But consciousness, it's modern psychology and neuroscience understands what consciousness is. It's a physical process in your brain, okay? So that's consciousness. And we also have a word, consciousness, that's your perspective as embodied in a body. The metaphysical consciousness is not the same as the conventional term consciousness.
Or like physical identity.
Like your meat automaton's consciousness. You know what I mean? Those are two different things. The perspective consciousness, the metaphysical consciousness, is more like a soul. A soul, though, is a third thing that's different. And I like, this is one thing, I really wish people would be like super careful about the distinction between the three. For instance, you could have a soul and no metaphysical consciousness. So no perspective, but a soul. You could have no soul, but a metaphysical consciousness and obviously a meatbag consciousness. So like, for instance, memories, we know memories are stored in your brain.
Yes.
From a physicalist perspective, we can look exactly where they are. We can stimulate them.
Yes.
It's not like surprising. They're in your brain. So when you can't necessarily transfer that from, how would you transfer that
then how do you explain people having memories, which are a physical thing, of some lifetime that they are not aware of having lived?
From the three versions of consciousness, essentially, from a purely conventional physicalist perspective, there's no way to like transfer information like that between brains. From a perspective, the metaphysical consciousness, that it pretty much just sits on your brain and observes. There's no like memory requirement for a metaphysical consciousness. The soul, however, that's something that necessarily can transfer information. At the very least, it transfers information of what it's attached to. So, like that, a psychologist saying, memories, blah, 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 they're not making a distinction how. They're not making a distinction which kind of consciousness. Are they talking about a soul? Are they talking, you know what I mean?
I have a problem with using the word soul. I really have a problem with it because there's so many religious connotations tied up in it.
That's true.
I have a real...
That's true. So all of those souls are multiplied by however many religious connotations.
Right. And so that I have a really problem. The fact that...
Astral body, that's why I kept saying astral body.
And actually, I found a lot of references to that, even in the articles on the physics of reincarnation. I found references to that, and they were definitely very scientific. Definitely outside of my understanding. Okay, so the fact that ancient philosophers described the way the universe works in mystical terms, it's meaningless because they just didn't understand the science of it. So, and you could think that was funny of me to say because I tend to think paranormal things. But my belief of it is that it's just like, you know, like in the Bible, they said you can't eat pork, that this was an abomination. But now we know the reason why you can't eat pork is because there's
parasites.
There's parasites in it. And if it's not cooked thoroughly, you'll get trichomonas and you could die. Okay. So there's something that was presented like a spiritual concept, which actually has basis in science. So the fact that we don't understand how your memories could exist outside of your brain recorder to me, isn't as big of a problem as it apparently is to everyone else I looked up.
So, but you see you see what I'm saying? Like, this is a really important distinction that is important for all of this. That there's a conventional perspective. Your brain is made of subatomic particles. There's nothing really more to it. And then there's tacked onto that metaphysical assumptions that you have a perspective that it's like something, a perspective that's looking through at your consciousness. It's like someone watching a television show. Them and the TV form something, but it's the TV that's really has the screen. You know what I mean? And then the astral body thing is essentially saying there's a larger physics and that there's something that attaches to your conventional body that persists.
The next part has a lot of quotes from quantum physics, which I have no understanding of. And when I read it, it's like something going wah, 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 wah in my brain. I don't know whether it's my innate terror of this or what it is, but I just don't get it. Okay?
I can maybe help.
Okay, make it simple and not scary.
Okay.
Okay. So, ether was defined by medieval magicians as the fifth element flowing through the universe.
It's really interesting. You see that all over the place. There's an invisible element. Like, have you ever heard of the prima materia?
I've seen that. I don't know what it... I haven't read anything about it.
That same thing appears all over. And physicists even called the medium through light waves transfer as the luminous ether.
Oh, interesting.
Same. They was on their mind, you know?
Well, the philosopher of magic, Matthew Rees, and I don't know anything about him because I did not look it up because philosopher of magic sounds like a BS, BS title. He said, ether is very versatile and can be transformed into matter, energy, or even essence by spells. A spell doesn't detect the presence of ether since ether is everywhere. Rather, it detects disturbances in the pattern. Is he
talking from, like, this is what past people believed?
I don't know.
This is what he believes.
So he says, rather, it detects disturbances in the pattern or flow of ether. These disturbances sound something like the Now, this isn't him talking. These disturbances sound something like the gravitational effect by which quantum particles are said to make their presence known. If the ether can be transformed into matter and energy, then magicians were there before Einstein, and E equals mc squared can be thought of as a spell. Both quantum particles and the ether can be considered in general terms to be that which is everywhere and everything. Okay.
Okay, so he's saying, essentially he's saying there's something some material
There's
that
a
can,
fifth element flowing through the universe.
that's everywhere.
That's everywhere.
That can move between
It can be transferred
a
into
form
matter.
that's not visible to a material form.
Right.
And he's saying that there's an analog of that in
No, he didn't say the thing about the other
because
part. He said it detects disturbances in the pattern or flow.
the pattern of flow of
Everything, everywhere.
so like the physical like presence or non-presence of that of material.
I don't think he's talking about physical presence at all. I think he's talking about energy. Ether is very versatile and can be transformed into matter, energy, or even essence.
Essence is
Hell, I don't know.
the stuff astral bodies are made
He's the philosopher of magic. I'm not.
So that sounds so much like what ancient people believed how things
Right.
functioned. It's like the prima material thing. There's a thing that turns into everything essentially, and everything can turn into it. It's a really interesting idea because there are a little bit of parallels kind of in physics. Maybe. I mean, I just have to say thought processes like that are interesting, but 100% you have to like rigorously validate them. And then maybe you just rigorously validate them for yourself, but if you just assume it's true and what you're saying has meaning, you know, it's not just word salad or whatever, then it has meaning for you if you get something out of it. Like for instance, if I go into a fucking room and I'm like in a trance and I create a bulb of this astral material or whatever, and it pops an object into physical space, then it has meaning, you know?
I don't think that's what he's saying. I think what he's saying is that there's a fifth element. Whether he understands what elements are or not doesn't matter.
He's saying a type of
There's
stuff
something else, and he's calling it ether. That is
everywhere.
in everything, everywhere.
Uh-huh.
Therefore, what is it? In physics, what would that mean?
Okay, so the closest analog in physics would be quantum fields, which, again, it's super strange, and there is an analogy between that and material that creates everything. But it's really hard to say that is a good
correlation?
Good correspondence between those two things, because we really have no idea how quantum physics works. I mean, people can...
Well, I don't think he has any idea how magic works.
Yeah,
you know.
Actually, that's a good point. Even if like fucking Merlin walks in and he's been doing magic and he can conjure shit left and right, okay? Even he does not know how it works.
Right. And I'll go back to the pork thing. Just because there in ancient times, or even now, because we are right now in ancient times of the future. So the things that we know now, in the future, they're going to be able to look back and say, oh, wasn't that quaint?
Yeah.
Isn't that sweet? They believed these things. So nothing that a scientist tells me, am I going to say, absolutely, I believe it, because I know that the scientist of today might be the philosopher of magic of tomorrow.
Yeah, like the cutting edge stuff in conceptions of how the world works way back when, they're just considered like ontological philosophers nowadays.
Yeah.
The maybe possible, I think I said this before, the maybe possible way that quantum physics says the world works, the most interesting way they say it works is the many worlds interpretation. So this is essentially how quantum fields work. You get a really powerful microscope and you look down and you heat a filament up, and the filament, every once in a while it shoots off an electron. Okay? Small particle, right? Shoots off a billiard ball. It shoots off, and let's say you can make it shoot off in one particular direction. Okay, but if you put something in the way, the billiard ball can actually like go around it, and in a particular way, like water waves going out, and it goes around it, and then it comes around and interacts with itself on the other side, as if it just went right through. But the weird thing is, if you put a screen and determine, you're thinking it's a billiard ball, so it's a solid thing, how can it go around? You put a screen on the other side, and you know that when it shoots off the filament, it's one object. It's doing something to interact with itself, and when it hits the screen, it hits the screen at one point. If you do it a bunch of times, you see this pattern as if it's a wave. So you do it a lot of times and you see a wave. You do it once, you see an object. That's called wave-particle duality. That's why you say, like, quantum fields are waves and particles. Does that make sense?
No.
So you do the experiment a bunch of times and you get one result. You do it once and you get another result.
Okay, let me repeat back what I just understood you to say, and you can correct me. Because obviously I missed something somewhere along the line.
It's very strange.
You have a filament, you superheat it, a particle comes off of it. We're going to call the particle a billiard ball. The billiard ball is shooting off in one direction. If you put something in its path, it will move around the path and then join it again. One item somehow splits and goes around the thing in its path, and then
it can
reunites
interact with itself to go around.
But if you put a screen there, instead of going around it, it goes into it, and it will meet the screen in different places, which produces a wave form if you were to...
So if you put the screen on past the obstacle, you can see where the thing arrives at, and it arrives at a single point on the screen. Like if it lit up a point on the screen, you can see that it shot off one thing and it arrived at one place. But if you do it a bunch of times, you can see there's this wave-like pattern on the screen. There was this idea called a superposition. The particle, the billiard ball, essentially does split and does interact with itself, but then something happens to cause it to collapse to a single point. So it acts like a billiard ball once you observe it. You know, once you can see where it had an effect, then it acts like a single object. But otherwise, if you're not looking at it, it doesn't. Okay? Does that...
But how do you know it doesn't?
You know it doesn't because it can go around objects. So it goes around objects. We know it's doing something weird when we don't know. If you try to get information, it just looks like a billiard ball.
Okay.
If you leave it alone, if it's between two observations, then it acts really weird. So the really interesting thing is when it stops behaving like a wave going around things and starts acting like a particle. So if you scale that up, so if you have like the detector and you're not looking at the detector and you have a recording device, the presumption is that when you aren't looking at it, it's still behaving like a superposition. That means lots of different versions of it are going and can interact with itself. Or whatever it's doing, it can interact with itself. So you record on the recorder and you don't look at it. You record on the recorder where it hit the screen. It doesn't matter where it hit the screen. You know, you're assuming it's still interacting with itself. Basically, it kind of hit every spot, but you don't know how it's doing that. But on the recorder is the information. When you play the recorder, it shows it hit in one spot somewhere. So the information is there. When you look at the information, then it hit in one spot. If you don't look at the information, then it has a chance of hitting any of the spots, and it's like a wave. If you scale it up to a large recorder, and this is where Schrodinger's cat comes in. Schrodinger has a cat, he puts it in a box, he's an evil son of a bitch, so he puts radioactive particle connected to poison in the box. The idea is when the particle decays, which acts just like the wave thing, it will cause the poison, it will scale it up. It will cause the poison to release, kill the cat. So when he shuts the box, he's not observing it. There's a chance the cat's alive, there's a chance the cat's dead. What's proposed to be happening, because again, we can't see in the interim between detection, between observations. What's proposed to be happening is, yes, the things are really in this kind of wave-like form, and they're interacting. The individual things are interacting, but it's only when you observe something that it then collapses, so it turns into a single version of itself. You see, it's very strange.
Okay, it is very strange, and it hurts my brain.
But I'm almost there. So there's a lot of different interpretations of what's happening. As far as I'm concerned, as far as a lot of people are concerned, the best explanation is there's a wave-like version of what's happening. And when you observe something, it's the information in your brain that allows you to essentially become a part of one of those versions. So your brain can't encode information that's like multiple versions of things interacting like a wave. Instead, you encode what you perceive as one version of that. It's very strange, but the gist of it is there are basically every version of the outcomes of things is happened, but you can only observe one of them, okay? So it's really happening. So it's like a physicalist really happening. You just can't interact with it. And contrary to what many worlds people will say, it's continuous. So it's like there's an infinite variation between every different version. Anyway, so the really important takeaway is the quantum fields are interacting in every way they can interact, and who knows what that actually looks like. You can't actually encode that information in your brain. It's quantum information. You can't do it. Every possibility of what could happen and potentially is happening, is happening because of this substance. So the substance is everything. It's like sort of like
ether.
Yes, sort of like ether, but it's like a puppet. It's like a shadow casting show where they shine the light and they do the things. This field is the shadows. It's making what appears to be reality, and it is reality. It's just those same things could make a lot of shapes. It's the same stuff. It could just be in a lot of different, and it is in a lot of different forms. So it's really interesting that there is an analogy between like the prima materia, the fundamental element, and quantum fields. Now, there would be really no way for primitive people to have ever observed this. Well, actually, I suppose, like, you can actually do the double slit experiment, which shows the wave-like thing with light at a macroscopic scale. You would probably only need really a candle, but it'd be very, very, very hard to have it only emit one particle of light and then observe that at the other side.
Yeah, that would
So you would have never known, but you could see the wave-like nature of light, even as a primitive person. There is actually a little bit of possible, maybe, justification for that physically. I mean, in conventional physics.
For justification for...
For, like, the ether. An ether that creates things, specifically.
Okay.
An ether that, like, influences things, maybe. An ether that's, like, holds souls. And I'm talking about, this is from a conventional perspective,
I'm going to read something.
Okay.
And it has to do about quantum rules and many worlds interpretation.
Oh, they said it, yeah.
Because, yes, that is what the scientists...
Most people, I think, get it really wrong.
The scientists, what they're studying now in regards to reincarnation are the many worlds interpretation. That is what they're studying. That's what they're focused on.
So I have to say, real quick, so remember Schrodinger's cat?
Yeah. Schrodinger actually never did that.
He never did it, and thankfully. I imagine someone has done it.
Probably.
And it's actually much easier to do it. You just have a light that comes on, put a researcher in a room, seal it off, vacuum. You can't have any interaction.
Yeah.
Because there's something called quantum decoherence.
Yeah.
When the thing goes, it turns on a light, and then they walk out the room. So the superposition version of them is actually walking out of the room pretty much continuously. But you can only see one version. But anyway, from the cat's perspective, it's possible the poison never releases because there's a bias for the continuity of their consciousness from a quantum physics perspective, which is the metaphysical consciousness, and so they are quantum immortal. They will never experience a version of the world where they die.
Okay,
but
so
it might not look like what you would expect.
Here's where my problem lies.
Okay, go ahead.
I don't have an alternate or expanded explanation from the many worlds interpretation. I don't have another one. But what I can say is this. It all balances on the belief that your existence, that whatever it is that makes you, I'm going to call it consciousness because I don't know what else to call it. Your consciousness exists. And why wouldn't a rock's consciousness exist then? Because from
a conventional quantum physics perspective, so the rock has a metaphysical consciousness, the metaphysical consciousness would then most closely align with what information it's encoding, classical information, so like regular world information it's encoding in its structure. So quantum physics also provides a metaphysical consciousness. That consciousness is just, I mean, as far as I can see, the information that's being encoded. So the observations, for instance, that forms like a history going back of what the world looks like from a classical perspective. The rock does have one of those, but there's like an infinite number of them.
Okay. Without going into a very deep discussion of many worlds interpretation, can you tell me how that looks in the context of a conversation about reincarnation? Not reincarnation from a religious point of view, not reincarnation from a possession point of view, but which is what that one theory you said at the beginning was, but reincarnation from a classical point of view, that somebody dies
from quantum physics perspective.
From a quantum physics perspective.
It's
simplified.
It's really hard at that point because quantum physics doesn't allow you to break physics. It doesn't allow magic or anything. Well, sort of.
It all sounds like magic.
But you still have to transfer the information somehow. You know what I mean? That's like the fundamental problem. I mean, there is, if there really is information transfer, how is that information being transferred?
You mean information as in memories of a lifetime being transferred to another person?
Yes. So it's really... No matter what, it's really hard to explain that.
Here's something
from
to
a
think
conventional
about.
perspective.
Think about this. And I've read a lot of stories. Out of all the stories I have read over the past weeks about reincarnation, and I have read a shit ton of them, they almost always are about children's memories until ages 5 to 7, and then they kind of go away.
It makes sense.
Yes, it does make sense. And this Dr. Ian Stevenson, he did the research and he investigated. And I think he said it was like 70 or 80% of the cases that came before him, he proved that what that kid said actually existed in another person's lifetime. That you know, he could confirm those details, and they were not famous people that these children were bringing up.
So they didn't like hear it, or
they're not saying they're Cleopatra. They're not saying they're, you know, King Arthur or something.
They didn't have any prior knowledge.
No, and they didn't have any prior knowledge. In fact, and he cataloged that about how that fit into the narrative.
Yeah.
You know, like the story about the kid who said he was a jet fighter pilot or a fighter pilot, and the parents had no experience with that. There was another one I read today that, let me just find it really quick. Okay, this one, this kid was 4 years old, and he started waking up, clutching his chest and telling his mom he couldn't breathe, and he felt like his heart had exploded. And when she asked him about this, he said it had exploded in Hollywood, but they lived in Oklahoma. He's a 4-year-old kid. If he's even heard about Hollywood, which he may have, he may have heard the word, he would have no concept of what Hollywood is. Yeah. And so he started talking about he wanted to go home to Hollywood. He wanted to see his other family. When he played with other children, as they began to play, he'd scream, "Action!" and "Cut!" As if he were a producer or director of a film. And so the mom didn't really think too much of it. She just thought it was a weird, quirky thing that he did, which is pretty weird. But okay, kids are weird. But eventually he started saying that he was an actor named Marty Martin. And they verified it. There was an actor named, well, he didn't actually say the name. First, he just started saying he was an actor. And then they were looking through a book one time, and he pointed at a picture and said, "That's me." And they couldn't figure out who it was, so they took it to somebody. Turned out it was verified. The guy's name was Marty Martin. But there were differences. Marty Martin didn't die from his heart exploding. He died of leukemia. You know, there were some other things. There were things that were exactly the same, but some things that were not. Out of all the stories we hear about kids, like that one, I saw a few references to adults saying they remembered a previous life, but not anywhere near those numbers. And Dr. Ian Stevenson was not finding that adults were coming to him and saying, "I have these memories." If the first thing you talked about, which I referred to as possession, was happening, we would be seeing people of all ages, and we're not.
Yeah.
So that
also, it would be hard to make the distinction between possession, where some other agency is taking control of you, versus you experiencing the other agency, information from someone else. It'd be hard to make that distinction. You're clairvoyant, you view the other person. It's not so much that they're like possessing you or you were reincarnated or whatever. It's that you are actually clairvoyant, and that's the paranormal thing.
But there's not even people saying that. I mean, there are people who say they are clairvoyant, but they're not saying, like those children did, I am Marty Martin, and I was a director in Hollywood.
The interesting thing about kids is that they don't have the preconceived ideas of what is interesting paranormal activity. You know, so
I think there's enough different iterations of people's personalities that there are people who would be childlike in that regard. And
so what I mean is, an adult has heard stories about reincarnation. Their mind, maybe they don't do it deliberately, but you could imagine that they would make something up. The interesting thing about kids, though, is they haven't had that experience hearing about reincarnation. So anything they say is inherently more believable. It might not be something you should believe, but it's more believable, you know?
Yeah.
Like if a kid in a culture where they have no conception of reincarnation says, "Ah, yes, I was Chief so-and-so," and no one told the fucking kid about Chief so-and-so, then that's way more believable than someone who later on says, "I am the embodiment of Chief so-and-so," because
they have lots of
want
opportunities
to be the chief, you know.
Yeah. Well, I do think that one of the biggest problems is with the human experience is that we try and define things. And this might be something that is beyond our current understanding and definition.
Yeah, so again, I'll go back to the definitions. I just said conventional perspective of consciousness, metaphysical perspective of consciousness, and then unconventional perspective of other materials, stuff associated with you. Is there a conventional perspective? Is there a metaphysical, in the sense of like mentalism, you know, like your perspective outside of physicalism? So that means like there's other way more interesting stuff happening that it can't even be described with predictive models, you know? Or is there a phenomenon that we can't study, we have no information about, and that phenomena is stuff we can't see, and that's transferring the information? Or, I mean, really, it is, again, about how is the information getting from the people to the kid. And that, I mean, I'm not being rhetorical. How is that happening?
I know.
So,
and so if you buy into Dr. Stevenson saying it's psychophore, or you buy into, okay, there was a guy named Paul Von Ward, and he was a scholar and a research, and he called it psychoplasm, which of course then you've got the whole neo-paranormal, you know, connotation of saying plasm.
Though everyone should keep in mind, no matter what the word is, and your impulse to be biased because of connotations for the word, the phenomena exists. Assuming the physical reality of it exists, the phenomena is out there, and it is the ultimate truth. If there is expanded physics beyond what we can observe, then that it's still going on. So the interesting thing, though, is to look at it from different perspectives. So like conventional perspective, how's the information transferring? There's a lot of people who believe like electrostatic and magnetic fields are magic. Like, for instance, some people don't even believe in gravity. They think it's electrostatic fields.
Yeah, I know.
They're probably wrong.
Again, you know, you can't trust anything anybody says. Unfortunately, what happens is that people then decide that everything is incorrect, that nothing is right. And
yeah, that's a whole like philosophic ism.
Yeah.
That, well, solipsism is the ultimate version of that, where nothing exists except you.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, that's pretty creepy. And that's usually people arrive at that because they're like depressed, or they hate everything, which is probably the wrong reason to arrive at that. But so like conventional perspectives, there's like some physical phenomenon that is transferring information, Oh, how about this? There are evolved life that's like a electrical phenomenon, or like
an electrical filament,
an electrical phenomenon, or like evolved life that lives in the structure of crystals in regular objects, and like it gradually works its way out and exchanges information.
You're saying what if, you're not saying this.
Oh yeah. Okay. No, I'm not saying this is how it is.
Okay.
And then that gradually like crawls in your brain, takes the information, crawls out, crawls over to a new person. And you know what I mean? Probably not, because entropy fucks everything up. And so something like that probably would fuck up. Although the entropic meta information, whatever the idea conceivably, so that is in super high entropy systems, the information for such and such thing is not lost. So like you burn up a piece of paper, what did it say? Well, it's all over the place now. It takes a lot of energy to put that back together, but the information is still, it's just scrambled.
Mm-hmm.
If there, for whatever reason, there are physics that allow that information to persist, say you're a robot made of paper, very sophisticated machine made of paper, and then they burned you up. Your information exists. Conceivably, you could still exist in what is essentially a entropically simulated universe. So, but beyond that, from unconventional perspective, that's really easy. I mean, you have like way more flexibility to say what it is, but you can just imagine, okay, there's an astral body. And now we don't need to say what the astral body is made of. It's made of stuff. Maybe it has astral guts and it eats astral, like floating worms or something. And it has its own physics. But it can attach onto a brain.
I don't like that.
And that, well, it's like a symbiosis of this is transferring information to a new person, That is unconventional because it requires more an expanded physics.
If thought is a construct of the physical structure of your brain, and memories are physically stored in your brain, it's still energy. It's being stored in your brain. It's energy that was converted into some kind of storage thing in your brain, right?
Essentially, energy is the modern equivalent of ether.
Okay, don't go into energy right now.
Okay.
We'll do a whole episode on energy. It's just like your brain is like the piece of paper with the information written on it. And when you die, it's like the piece of paper that burned up. It's just like, boom, it's gone. But all that stuff that was in your brain still exists.
Yeah, fundamentally it still exists. It's just at the very least scrambled. And again, there could be some physical laws that allow scrambled information to continue. There's actually a whole study called fully homomorphic functions or operations or something like that, which means, let's say you encrypt a file and you don't want to decrypt it. You want to like apply something, like you want to replace every word in the file with something else. That would allow you to apply an encrypted version or an encoded version of the function on the encoded file. So that means like it's scrambled, the file is scrambled. Then you make a scrambled function, essentially, and apply it to the scrambled file. And it produces the equivalent scrambled file as if you had unscrambled it, applied the regular function, then re-scrambled it. I think there are so many possible explanations.
For reincarnation.
For reincarnation. No. There are so many possible explanations for how the information gets in the kids' heads. Maybe it's reincarnation. Maybe there's something else. It's that flexible. There's so many possible ways to explain it. And as usual with paranormal things, there might not even be any way to invalidate any of them.
Or validate.
Or validate any of them. So reincarnation is really hard.
Like I always said to my brother David, because he said nothing paranormal has ever happened to him. And I said, when it happens to you, then you'll understand. And so I suppose unless you yourself or I myself had an experience where you remembered a past life and then you sat down at the computer and got on Ancestry.com or something and found that person did in fact live, that would probably, even if you couldn't prove it to a wider audience, I think it'd prove it to me.
Yeah, again, so you also are doing science by observing things, and if it is convincing for you, that's good enough. Here's a general problem that is also probably existentially terrifying.
Great.
But no matter what, even if you're the ultimate skeptic, even if you are a hard physicalist, like scientist, empiricist, doesn't matter. There's one problem, and it's actually related to like solipsism. What was it that old philosopher said? Oh, I think, therefore I am. Mm-hmm. It's related to that. There is fundamentally no way to know if your universe is being simulated. So that means there's no way to know that there's not a super universe that through its own inner workings is producing your universe. There's no way to know it. So like the easiest idea, like conception of that is there's like the world outside the matrix, and it's like a computer, it's computing whatever. It's
computing your reality.
It's computing your reality. That's the really easy version. There's something going along with this fundamental problem, which is you have absolutely, literally zero information about the universe simulating you. So that's your parent universe. You have no information about your parent universe. It doesn't have to behave in any way that makes sense. In fact, you could have things that don't make any sense. You could have multiple parent universes that are each created you. Your universe has a whole history of having created you, and they only realize that you also have another parent universe because another universe created you.
Okay, I have two comments. One, and don't interrupt me until I've said both.
Okay, go ahead.
One is, why would a parent universe do that? What would be the motivating factor that would do that? That's number one. And number two is, how would that relate to reincarnation?
Okay, one, why would they do it? Again, you have literally no information. Nothing, literally nothing applies. No logical ideas, no anything applies to your parent universe. You have literally no information about it. It might not behave at all in any way you'd expect, or could possibly expect, or literally physically cannot expect. A model of the universe that we're simulated by super universe, it's super, super vague. There's every possible version of just you're simulated, and that goes way beyond like even physicalists, even idealists. So that means people who believe only that there's concepts and no physical reality. Mm-hmm. Even they are subject to this. Even your parent universe is subject to this. So you can't say necessarily why. There might not even be entities that would be there to ask why. It might not even make sense to ask why. And the other one is how it relates to reincarnation. So from a physicalist perspective, there's a physical reality, and you are simulated by the physical reality. There's no actual way to know that you are actually simulated by that physical reality.
But there's no real reason why it would matter.
Yeah, okay, so from the immaterialist perspective, so like the general, there is no physical reality, there's only mind. Your perspective, you are simulating physical reality, and in a sense, you're simulating yourself.
Instead of an outside force that is simulating it, you're within yourself.
There's no also way to know that's true. Even if you like popped out of yourself and said, yes, this is the way it works. There's no way to know that's true. And in a simulated universe, so like there's a conventional like computer, and it's simulating either the physicalist version where it's simulating particles and everything, and you are simulated by the particles, or they're simulating your perspective. It's essentially like they're looking at your perspective and generating what the world would look like. So this is inside of a computer, and you're simulated by the computer and whatever. So from that perspective, in each of these, I think, therefore I am, you exist. So if you look at each one of them, so look, like for instance, the physicalist perspective, you still do exist in the physicalist, you are simulated. If you quote unquote die, the worst that could happen is your memory is gone. So you can't remember what happened, but you're just still
But you don't
doing
really
stuff.
have any memory because you're not even real.
Yeah, so you have a memory of your contextualized by you exist in the thing. So like, for instance, your simulated self has a memory.
It's like I'm playing Pac-Man and has a memory that the last time I played I had 300,000 points.
Yeah. So from the immaterialist perspective, it doesn't matter. Death doesn't matter. You could appear as any fucking thing you wanted. You know, the continuity is that you just continue to exist. And you'll probably exist as then another person. From you're simulated by another version of what we see around us. So like future people made a computer, they're simulating you, however that works. Your perspective will continue to exist in multiple different possible ways. Like they could just plop you down again as a baby.
They meaning whatever force it is.
Yeah, so the scientists that made the simulation or whatever, or probably the super intelligent machine that made the simulation. There was a reason the Matrix had that as their plot line. In each one, regardless, there is a continuity, not necessarily a memory continuity, but a continuity of perspective, like regardless, I think, therefore I am. So it's a continuity. There's not necessarily a memory, though, from the strictest one of these ideas, physicalist, conventional, whatever, you are simulated by reality. That would be you lose all your memory when you die, and let's say you're reincarnated, your perspective is reincarnated, your perspective continues in a different body. You have no memory, though. Though, again, quantum physics might say that you shift perspectives and...
I have to say that I find what you have just described
terrifying, yes,
to be no more
existentially terrifying.
To be no more outlandish, outrageous, or far-fetched than saying you have a soul and it floats up into the sky.
Yeah,
and
so the difference is
angel flies over to a
that
baby.
could conceivably be falsified. The simulation thing, it actually cannot ever be falsified or confirmed. Again, so it works like this. You can do a lot of different things. So you can do a lot of, let's say, experiments. Let's call them experiments. You can do a lot of different things in your universe. That's all the things you can do.
Instead of calling it universe, let's call it your life.
In your life, and that includes everything.
Everything you see and interact with.
Everything you could possibly see and interact with, everything you do see and everything. You can do experiments, and you get information from those experiments. But if you were simulated, those things fundamentally cannot extend outside of that life
that you're in. But how would you even know, or why would you ever even care? Because you can't extend
it may not matter completely at all whether or not you're simulated or not.
Okay, so let me just say this. What did you call this theory? What is this called?
People call it simulation hypothesis, but that's generally more for like, there's a computer simulation of you.
Okay, let's say in simulation hypothesis, a kid is born. That kid, it is not his parents' little manufactured, constructed world. It's his, right? His parents are just bit players in his little imagined thing. So what's to say that he has this thought about a previous life, and he manufactures the proof to prove that he had that previous life? So it doesn't matter, because reincarnation doesn't matter. It's just another
essentially
thing.
Another interesting thing related to that is
it's going to scare me, I can tell.
There may actually, I think there's some interpretations of quantum mechanics that allow information to go back in time. I think I've said this, but like generally, what are the like retrocausal models? So like, for instance, you know, the like many worlds, lots of different versions of very colorful universe where everything's happening. You're living many different lives and it's all grand and amazing. Okay. Let's say you get to a point and you remember, let's say it's a false memory, what you would call a false memory of like going to a certain place. It may also be because of various ways the universe works, that having the memory of it actually caused you to have done that. So, like, for instance, what that would look like from a third person's perspective, kid is born, says he was born as whatever, and because he said that, the person exists, and that also could mean he really did live as that.
Is this how you think all the time? Are you like living in this existence where this is terrifying?
No. It's like a wave of existentialism, you know?
Well, and the reason why I think it's terrifying is not that it's scary, but that it is so vast and so unknown. And I want to know.
That's why I said, like, you view like the many worlds thing as very colorful, because it's a very interesting universe if that's how it works. I mean, there's the minor form and then there's the major form.
Well, after hearing that, I think the many worlds one is mild compared to that.
Compared to, the reverse, the retrocausal version?
No, the
simulation?
The simulation.
Yeah, that's just like, because you can't know it means you essentially, it has no meaning.
I think that the worst thing about it is that it feels like tricking. It feels like tricking you. So that,
like I'm tricking you?
No, not you, but like you're being tricked into believing something that isn't real. But then what is really real?
I think that's what people, when they said in the past they feel like they're going mad, that's the feeling, you know?
No.
That's the feel, like the feelings you get when things seem crazy like that.
Okay.
Though, an interesting thing related to that. You know the philosophic zombie I said? Mm-hmm. So they just say zombie, ignore the connotation. It's zombie, it just doesn't have a soul. Okay? Think of it like this. I make a person, it's a robot. It looks exactly like a person, acts exactly like a person. You literally cannot tell.
Okay.
Once it's all assembled and you oversaw every part of it, how its mind works, how it's everything, it functions exactly like a person, but it's a machine. You know it's a machine. Now, assuming there wasn't like a soul that wafted over and became attached to the thing, assuming it doesn't have a metaphysical consciousness, okay, it can behave exactly like another person. So let's say it thinks, oh my God, I'm going crazy, you know, because like the simulation is shutting down or whatever. It's not a fault of its like perspective in the universe. It's a fault of its construction. You know, so like a bug doesn't care. You know what I mean?
Oh, I gotcha. Yeah.
It's only your meat body that cares. And your meat body just happens to not be the part that matters. Mm-hmm. So like a robot, you could have a robot that doesn't feel that. And even if a soul attached to it, that wouldn't be the part that matters. The soul might observe that it's having a hard time, but it's like a bug. You could attach like neurons in a bug so that it has a hard time with walking over salt or something. And from its little attached soul's perspective, walking over the salt is terrible. Same thing with a person.
I want to say something that's not in that at all, but it just occurred to me as you're talking about this robot zombie thing. So I've read a lot of different stories. Some, and by stories I don't mean fiction, they're actual reporting on people who had terrible catastrophic illnesses or accidents, and they're in a coma, and the doctors hook up all the little electrodes to them and they say they're brain dead. We should just unplug the machine. And in some cases the family argues and says, no, we're not going to unplug the machine. And in some cases they do unplug the machine, but the body persists and the person appears to be in a vegetative state. The doctors say they have no brain waves. And then one day, granted it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally, they wake up. And when they wake up, they have memories of the things that happened. But the machines weren't registering anything going on in their brains.
That might be a point where the
simulation,
the beyond conventional soul comes in. Soul can observe things. It doesn't need brainwaves, you know.
Yeah,
a soul, an astral body, whatever, ether body. It's like a creature that evolved in the ether along with the person. You know, when you're born, it's like it's actually creating this ether body too. You know, you can imagine.
I do think it's interesting that out of all the religions in the world, Christianity and Islam absolutely do not believe in reincarnation. But even the Catholic Church was founded on reincarnation. I just think that's interesting. And again, let me just point out the thing about pork, and now we know why you shouldn't eat pork that's undercooked. I don't eat pork at all because I think it's disgusting. But maybe someday we'll discover, maybe it's many worlds. Maybe it's a simulation. Maybe it's angels. I don't know. I'm going to probably delete all
Cool
that.
beans.
I don't even know how to do anything anymore. When I was a little kid, my middle brother told me, "You might be in a coma and dreaming all this," and it totally freaked me out. Joe's perspectives made me feel the same way. What do you think? Is this all a simulation? Can that explain memories of past lives? Did Joe's explanation of physics theories make you feel just a tad uncomfortable? Let us know. Our contact information is in the show notes. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.